right, hello there. Welcome to what I can only describe as a financial kerfuffle of potentially epic proportions, or if you're feeling dramatic, a geopolitical ballet danced on a floor made of increasingly wobbly US Treasury bonds. Buckle up, because Japan's recent maneuvers in the US bond market are sending shockwaves through the global economy. And frankly, shockwaves might be an understatement. Think more along the lines of a kaiju stomping through Wall Street, but instead of atomic breath, it's wielding spreadsheets and a deep, abiding frustration with American trade policy. This isn't just some dry, dusty financial news story that you can safely ignore while you doom scroll through cat videos. Although please do send me your best cat videos. No, these actions are tightly linked to the intensifying trade conflict over electric vehicle (EV) tariffs. Yes, those sleek, silent chariots of the future are now at the heart of an international stare-down. It's like a silent movie chase scene, but instead of pies to the face, it's tariffs and bond sell-offs. One minute you're admiring a zero-emission future, the next you're wondering if your national currency is about to take a nosedive because someone, somewhere, decided to play hardball with car import duties. This is the kind of intricate global drama that makes you realize just how interconnected everything is. In a slightly terrifying butterfly flaps its wings and causes a global recession kind of way. So what's unfolding is more than a financial tug-of-war. It's a high-stakes geopolitical chess match where the pawns are trillions of dollars and the kings and queens are national economies. And like any good chess match, it's complicated, it's tense, and there's a very real chance someone's about to flip the board over in a fit of pique. We're going to try and unpack this whole messy, fascinating situation. Why is Japan, a historically steadfast ally and holder of US debt, suddenly making these bold moves? And what does it all mean for your wallet, your next car purchase, and the delicate balance of global power? Let's dive in, shall we? For decades, Japan has been the financial equivalent of that incredibly reliable friend who always shows up when you're moving. You know the one, they bring the pizza, they don't complain about the heavy lifting, and they quietly make sure your fragile items don't end up in 1,000 pieces. In this metaphor, the heavy lifting is buying US Treasury securities, and the fragile items are, well, the stability of the US economy. Japan, long considered a bedrock of stability for US debt markets, currently holds over $1.1 trillion in these securities. That's trillion, with a T. A number so large it almost sounds made up, like gazillion, or the number of times I've rewatched that video of a dog failing to catch a ball. This financial relationship, this quiet, consistent purchasing of American debt, hasn't just been a casual arrangement. It's been a pillar of American economic strength and global confidence in the dollar. Think of it as an international vote of confidence, cast in cold, hard cash repeatedly. For years this symbiotic dance has worked. The US gets a willing buyer for its debt, helping to keep its borrowing costs manageable, and Japan gets a safe, stable place to park its vast reserves. It's been a cornerstone of the post-war global financial order, a seemingly unshakable alliance built on mutual economic interest and a shared understanding of how things are supposed to work. But, and there's always a but in these stories, isn't there? Otherwise, I wouldn't have a show. Recently, something has shifted. The reliable friend is starting to look a bit miffed, perhaps even eyeing the exit. Reports and market data indicate that Japan has begun to, shall we say, recalibrate its holdings. This isn't just rearranging the sock drawer, this is a significant, noticeable reduction in their appetite for US bonds. It's the financial equivalent of someone who always orders the same thing at a restaurant suddenly saying, "You know what? I think I'll try something else today." And everyone else at the table gasps. This recalibration, this gentle, or perhaps not so gentle, offloading of US Treasury holdings is what we're calling the tipping point. It's a subtle signal, perhaps, but in the world of international finance, subtle signals from a player as big as Japan can have the impact of a foghorn in a library. Why now? Why is Japan, our steadfast financial companion, starting to edge away from the US debt buffet? Well, that, my friends, is where things get particularly spicy, and it involves those shiny electric cars we were talking about earlier. The implications of Japan, one of the largest foreign holders of US debt, deciding to sell off even a portion of its $1.1 trillion mountain are, to put it mildly, significant. It's like removing a Jenga block from a very, very tall tower. It might be fine, or it might be the start of a rather spectacular collapse. This move can put upward pressure on US interest rates, making borrowing more expensive for the US government, for businesses, and ultimately for consumers like you and me. Mortgages, car loans, credit card rates, they're all linked to this delicate dance. Imagine the US government as someone who's been comfortably living on a very generous line of credit from a very wealthy aunt. Suddenly Aunt Japan hints that she might need some of that money back, or at least she's not going to be lending quite so freely in the future. This forces the US to look for other lenders who might not be as generous or who might demand a higher price for their trouble. This is the fundamental dynamic at play when a major creditor starts to sell. This isn't just an abstract economic theory, it's a real-world lever. When a country holds a substantial amount of another nation's debt, it possesses a certain, shall we say, influence. It's like knowing a really embarrassing secret about someone. You might not ever use it, but its existence subtly changes the power dynamic. Japan has for decades been a holder of that influence, but has largely chosen not to wield it overtly. The question now is whether that long-standing policy of quiet cooperation is coming to an end. The sheer scale of Japan's holdings, over $1.1 trillion, cannot be overstated. It represents a significant chunk of the total US debt held by foreign entities. If Japan were to aggressively sell these bonds, it could trigger a cascade effect, prompting other foreign investors to question the stability of US debt and potentially follow suit. This could lead to a run on US treasuries, a scenario that, while perhaps extreme, is not entirely outside the realm of possibility if market confidence erodes significantly. For decades, the US has benefited immensely from Japan's willingness to recycle its trade surpluses back into US government bonds. This arrangement helped finance American deficits and kept US interest rates lower than they might otherwise have been. It was a comfortable status quo. But status quos, like all good things and also many terrible things, eventually come to an end, or at least face serious challenges. The current actions by Japan suggest that this particular status quo is under considerable strain. The fact that this move is happening now, amidst a backdrop of rising global economic uncertainty and shifting geopolitical alliances, only adds to its significance. It's not just a financial transaction, it's a statement. It's a signal that the old rules may no longer apply, or at least that Japan is willing to test the boundaries of those rules. And the ripple effects of this tipping point could spread far beyond the esoteric world of bond traders and central bankers, potentially impacting everything from global trade flows to international relations. So why the sudden cold shoulder from our friends in Tokyo regarding US bonds? Well, as it so often does, it comes down to trade. Specifically, it's about the electric vehicle sector, which has become the unlikely battleground for this financial skirmish. At the heart of this escalating conflict is the electric vehicle sector. Japan, you see, isn't just famous for sushi, anime, and an almost supernatural level of politeness. It has also become a global leader in EV and hybrid technologies. We're talking automotive giants like Toyota, Nissan, and Honda. Companies that have been pioneering innovation in this space for years, long before EV became a buzzword for every tech bro with a podcast. These Japanese automakers have invested billions, possibly trillions of yen, which is a lot. Trust me, I looked it up, it has many zeros, in developing cutting-edge batteries, efficient electric motors and hybrid systems that are the envy of many. They've built a formidable global presence, exporting these advanced vehicles and their components around the world. And crucially, they've been eyeing the lucrative US market as a key area for growth. Because Americans, bless our gas-guzzling hearts, do love our cars. Now enter the United States, a country that also fancies itself a bit of an automotive powerhouse, and is, understandably, keen to ensure its own domestic EV industry doesn't get left in the dust, or rather, the exhaust fumes of its gasoline-powered predecessors. The US government, across recent administrations, has been pushing hard to bolster American EV manufacturing. This is where the dreaded T word comes into play: tariffs. Yes, tariffs. Those delightful taxes on imported goods that sound like a sensible way to protect local jobs until you realize they can also make things more expensive and apparently annoy your major creditors. The US has imposed or threatened to impose tariffs on imported EVs and related components, and Japanese automakers, with their significant export operations, are squarely in the crosshairs. These tariffs can make Japanese EVs less competitive in the US market, potentially harming sales, profits and market share for companies like Toyota and Nissan. It's a classic trade protectionist move designed to shield domestic industries, but it comes with the risk of, shall we say, poking the bear, or in this case, the technologically advanced, financially savvy Japanese snow macaque. This is where Japan's holdings of US Treasury bonds become a very interesting and potentially very powerful bargaining chip. If your biggest customer for, say, cars starts making it difficult for you to sell those cars, and you also happen to be one of their biggest lenders, you might start to wonder if those two things are, or should be, related. It's like if your landlord also owned the coffee shop where you work, and then they suddenly tripled your rent and cut your hours. You'd start looking for leverage, wouldn't you? Japan's decision to reduce its US bond holdings can be interpreted, and is being interpreted by many analysts, as a form of financial leverage. It's a subtle yet potent way of signaling displeasure with US trade policies. By selling US bonds, Japan can create a degree of financial discomfort for the US, potentially nudging Washington towards a more conciliatory stance on EV tariffs. It's a high-stakes game of economic chicken, where both sides have a lot to lose. Think of the global economy as an incredibly complex machine with countless interconnected gears. A tariff on Japanese EVs might seem like a small adjustment to one part of that machine, but it can have unforeseen consequences on other seemingly unrelated parts, like the market for US government debt. This is the intricate dance of international economic relations, where trade policy and financial policy are not separate arenas, but deeply intertwined aspects of a nation's overall strategic posture. The Japanese government, while typically very diplomatic and understated in its public pronouncements, is undoubtedly aware of the potential impact of its financial decisions. They know that the US relies on foreign investment to finance its budget deficits. They also know that a sudden withdrawal of that investment, or even the credible threat of such a withdrawal, can send jitters through global financial markets and put pressure on US policymakers. This isn't about malice, it's about national interest in protecting a vital sector of their economy. The escalation, therefore, isn't just a shouting match between trade negotiators, it's a multi-level chess game. On one level, you have the direct dispute over EV tariffs, with lobbyists, industry groups and government officials all making their case. On another, deeper level, you have the quiet, powerful movements in the bond markets, where trillions of dollars shift hands and signal shifts in confidence and strategic alignment. Japan is essentially saying, we'd prefer not to escalate, but please be aware we have options. And so, the electric vehicle, a symbol of clean energy and technological progress, finds itself at the epicenter of a financial power play. The gleaming showrooms and charging stations are now the backdrop for a much larger drama involving national treasuries and global economic stability. It's a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, the ripples from a trade dispute in one sector can indeed become a financial tsunami in another. This is the new reality of geoeconomics, where cars and capital are two sides of the same coin. For the better part of a century, the US dollar has been strutting around the global stage like the king of the financial prom. It's the world's primary reserve currency, the bedrock of international trade, the currency in which oil is priced, and the safe haven everyone runs to when things get a bit dicey. This dominance, often referred to as dollar hegemony, grants Washington unparalleled economic and political leverage. It means the US can borrow more cheaply, exert influence through sanctions, and generally enjoy a financial exorbitant privilege that other countries can only dream of or bitterly resent. But every king even one made of green paper and digital bits, has a potential vulnerability, an Achilles heel, if you will. And in this particular drama, that vulnerability might just be its reliance on foreign creditors to keep the whole majestic enterprise afloat. Enter Japan, stage left, holding a rather large IOU. Japan, as we've established, holds approximately 15% of all foreign-owned US debt. Let that sink in. 15%. That makes it one of the largest and therefore most influential single foreign bondholders the US has. It's like finding out your quiet, unassuming neighbor owns a significant stake in your house. This isn't just a quirky financial statistic, it's a point of significant leverage. When a single entity holds that much of your debt, their actions, their sentiments, their slightest whim can have outsized consequences. If Japan decides to significantly reduce its holdings of US treasuries, it's not just a ripple. It's a potential seismic event for the dollar. Selling off large quantities of dollar-denominated assets, US bonds, and converting them back into yen or other currencies naturally puts downward pressure on the dollar's value. A weakening dollar might sound good to some US exports become cheaper, for instance, but it also means imports become more expensive, potentially fueling inflation. More critically, for a reserve currency, a sustained and significant decline in value can erode global confidence. If the dollar starts to look less like a safe haven and more like a risky bet, other countries might begin to diversify their own reserves, further weakening the dollar in a potential feedback loop. This is the nightmare scenario that keeps US Treasury officials up at night, probably next to a very large bottle of antacids. Japan's move, therefore, isn't just a bilateral issue between Washington and Tokyo. It has global ramifications. If Japan, a G7 nation and a close US ally, is seen to be actively reducing its dollar exposure and using its financial clout to influence US policy, it could embolden other countries to consider similar strategies. Nations that have long chafed under dollar dominance or have their own trade grievances with the US might see Japan's actions as a playbook, a template for how to push back. The US has long benefited from the global willingness to hold dollars and US debt. This has allowed it to run large current account deficits and finance its government spending relatively easily. But this system relies on continued confidence. If major players like Japan start to signal a wavering of that confidence, even subtly, it can be incredibly destabilizing. It's like a popular restaurant that suddenly gets a few bad reviews from influential food critics. Suddenly, everyone starts wondering if the food was ever really that good to begin with. The very structure of global finance, with the dollar at its center, could be tested by such a move. While no one is predicting an imminent collapse of the dollar as the world's reserve currency, these things tend to shift glacially, not overnight. Japan's actions could certainly contribute to a faster erosion of its standing. It could accelerate the trend towards a more multipolar currency world, where other currencies like the euro or even the yuan play larger roles. This isn't something the US would welcome, as it would diminish its unique global financial power. Consider the sheer mechanics. If Japan sells, say, $100 billion of US treasuries, it needs to find buyers for those bonds. If there aren't enough enthusiastic buyers at current prices, the price of those bonds will fall, which means their yield, the interest rate, will rise. Higher US government borrowing costs mean a heavier debt burden for American taxpayers and potentially less fiscal space for other priorities. It's a direct hit to the US government's pocketbook, orchestrated in this scenario by a disgruntled trading partner. This financial weak spot, the reliance on foreign capital, is a well-known, if often downplayed, feature of the US economy. For years, the benefits of dollar dominance have largely outweighed the risks. But as geopolitical tensions rise and economic competition intensifies, these underlying vulnerabilities can become more exposed and more exploitable. Japan's actions serve as a stark reminder that holding a nation's debt is not merely a passive investment, it is a form of latent power. So, while the immediate fight might be over electric car tariffs, the battlefield extends to the very foundations of America's global financial standing. A move by Japan to significantly divest from US bonds, or even a credible threat to do so, is a clear signal that it's willing to touch that third rail of US economic power. It's a bold, risky gambit, but one that underscores the seriousness of the trade dispute and Japan's determination to protect its economic interests, potentially at the dollar's expense. It's almost poetic in a deeply ironic, the future is weird kind of way, that electric vehicles, these symbols of a cleaner, greener tomorrow, have become ground zero in this rather messy U.S-Japan trade conflict. You'd think something designed to save the planet would engender a bit more international cooperation, but nope. Turns out you can slap a tariff on a Prius just as easily as you can on a pickup truck, and people will get just as upset about it. The electric vehicle sector is now, quite literally, at the center of this storm, the eye of a hurricane made of tariffs, bonds, and diplomatic tension. The push for EV supremacy isn't just about bragging rights at international auto shows. It's about future economic dominance, jobs, technological leadership, and of course, those pesky carbon emissions targets. The former Trump administration, with its America First mantra, and now the Biden administration, with its focus on domestic manufacturing and green initiatives, have both pushed aggressive policies to boost domestic EV manufacturing. This isn't a partisan issue in its entirety, it's about national industrial strategy. The goal is clear: make America the place where EVs are designed, built and sold. To achieve this, successive US administrations have deployed a range of tools, from subsidies for consumers buying American-made EVs to tax breaks for companies building battery plants on US soil. And crucially, they've wielded the stick of tariffs. This includes imposing tariffs or threatening to impose them on imported EVs and critical EV components, especially from nations like Japan, which, as we've discussed, happens to be rather good at making these things. It's like inviting everyone to a potluck, but then charging a hefty entrance fee if they bring a dish that's better than yours. For Japan, this is more than just an economic irritant, it's a direct challenge to one of its flagship industries. Japanese automakers have poured decades of research and development and vast sums of capital into becoming leaders in hybrid and electric vehicle technology. They see the US market as critical for their continued success and growth. US tariffs, therefore, are perceived not just as a trade barrier, but as an attempt to kneecap a key Japanese economic engine. It's understandable why they might be a tad miffed. The US argument, of course, is that these measures are necessary to level the playing field, to counteract perceived unfair trade practices by other countries, or simply to ensure that the US isn't left behind in a critical 21st century industry. They might point to subsidies or industrial policies in other nations as justification for their own protective measures. It's the classic "they started it" argument, but played out with billions of dollars and the future of transportation at stake. This focus on EVs as the central battleground highlights a broader shift in global economic competition. It's no longer just about traditional manufacturing sectors like steel or textiles. The new commanding heights of the global economy are in high-tech industries, and EVs, with their complex interplay of software, battery technology, advanced materials, and sophisticated manufacturing processes, are a prime example. Whichever nations dominate these sectors will likely have a significant edge in the decades to come. So when the US slaps a potential 25% tariff, or even higher, on an imported Japanese EV, it's not just an abstract number on a customs form. It's a direct hit to that vehicle's competitiveness against a domestically produced Ford Mustang Mach-E or a Tesla. It can mean the difference between a sale and a car languishing on the dealer lot. And when you multiply that effect across thousands or hundreds of thousands of vehicles, it adds up to a very big problem for Japanese exporters. This is why the EV issue has become so incredibly contentious. It's not just about cars, it's about national pride, industrial strategy, and the future shape of the global automotive market, which is one of the largest markets in the world. The transition to electric mobility is a once-in-a-generation industrial transformation, and every major manufacturing nation wants a piece of that very large, very green pie. The US wants to ensure its slice is as big as possible, even if it means using tariffs that upset its allies. The Japanese response, potentially linking this trade friction to its US bond holdings, demonstrates just how seriously they're taking this threat to their EV industry. It's a signal that they are willing to use unconventional leverage to protect what they see as a vital national interest. The electric vehicle, therefore, has transformed from a mere product into a geopolitical pawn, a high-tech bargaining chip in a much larger game of economic hardball. The irony is that both the US and Japan share common goals in terms of wanting to see wider EV adoption for environmental reasons. Yet, national economic interests and competitive pressures are currently overriding that shared objective, leading to this conflict. It's a reminder that even in the pursuit of supposedly universal goods, like a cleaner planet, old-fashioned economic nationalism can still throw a very large, very oily wrench in the works. The road to an electric future, it seems, is paved with more than just good intentions. It's also paved with tariffs and treasury bonds. Now, let's zoom out from the specifics of bond yields and EV battery chemistries, because this confrontation unfolding between the US and Japan is about far more than just trade figures or financial instruments. At its core, it's about global economic dominance and the potential for shifting geopolitical alliances. This isn't just a bilateral spat that the rest of the world can comfortably watch from the sidelines with a bucket of popcorn. No, the ripples from this particular pond could swamp quite a few boats. Think about who's watching this drama unfold. China, for instance, a massive economic power in its own right, with its own significant holdings of US debt and its own ambitions in the EV sector, is undoubtedly observing these developments with intense interest. If Japan, a long-standing US ally, can successfully use its financial leverage to extract concessions from Washington, what might that signal to Beijing, which has had its own share of rather public and acrimonious trade disputes with the US? It could be seen as a green light, or at least a flashing yellow for employing similar tactics. Then there's South Korea, another major automotive and technology player, also with significant trade and financial ties to the United States. They too are heavily invested in the EV transition and are keen observers of US trade policy. European nations, with their powerful automotive industries and their own complex trade relationships with the US, will also be taking copious notes. The list goes on. Essentially, any country with a significant stake in global trade and finance is watching to see how this US-Japan scenario plays out. If Japan successfully pressures the US into relaxing tariffs on EVs by wielding the threat of bond sales, it could set a powerful and potentially destabilizing precedent. It would essentially validate the idea of financial leverage as a potent diplomatic weapon in trade disputes. Imagine a world where major creditors routinely threaten to dump a country's bonds every time they disagree with its trade policies. It would inject a huge amount of volatility and uncertainty into global markets, and could make international relations even more transactional and fraught than they already are. This could lead to a scenario where economic power, defined not just by GDP or manufacturing output, but by the sheer volume of another nation's debt one holds, becomes an increasingly overt tool of statecraft. It's a game that countries with large foreign exchange reserves and significant US bond holdings like China and Japan are uniquely positioned to play. For the US, this would represent a significant challenge to its ability to conduct independent trade policy without constantly looking over its shoulder at its creditors. Moreover, this dispute could accelerate the diversification away from the US dollar as the sole dominant reserve currency, a trend we touched upon earlier. If holding US debt becomes a geopolitical risk, or if the US is seen to be vulnerable to financial pressure from its creditors, other nations might be more inclined to reduce their own dollar holdings and explore alternatives. This could further fragment the global financial system and reduce the exorbitant privilege the US has long enjoyed. The geopolitical fallout could also extend to alliances. Japan is a cornerstone of US strategy in Asia. A serious economic dispute that involves one side using financial coercion against the other could strain this vital alliance. While it's unlikely to lead to a complete rupture, it could introduce new tensions and mistrust, potentially creating openings for other powers like China to expand their influence in the region. It's a delicate balancing act, and actions taken in the heat of a trade dispute can have long-lasting strategic consequences. The broader global impact could be a more protectionist and fragmented world economy. If major economic powers resort to tit-for-tat measures, using everything from tariffs to bond market interventions, it could lead to a slowdown in global trade, reduced cross-border investment, and ultimately slower economic growth for everyone. It's the kind of scenario that economists warn about in dire tones, often using phrases like beggar thy neighbor policies, which sound quaint but describe a rather unpleasant reality. Conversely, if the US digs in its heels and refuses to yield to Japanese financial pressure and perhaps even retaliates, it could escalate the conflict further, potentially leading to a full-blown trade and financial war between two of the world's largest economies. The collateral damage from such a scenario would be immense, impacting global supply chains, financial markets, and consumer confidence worldwide. It's a game of chicken with potentially catastrophic economic consequences. Ultimately, what we are witnessing is a test case for the new era of geo-economic competition. The lines between economics and national security, between trade policy and foreign policy, are becoming increasingly blurred. The US-Japan dispute over EVs and bonds is a clear illustration of this trend, where tools traditionally confined to one domain are now being deployed in another. The outcome will not only shape the future of the US-Japan relationship, but could also redefine the rules of engagement for global economic power in the 21st century. So there you have it. A situation more tangled than a pair of headphones left in a pocket for too long. We've got Japan, a historically steadfast buyer of US debt, now seemingly using its immense US Treasury holdings as a bargaining chip in a high-stakes dispute over electric vehicle tariffs. It's a financial power play that could redefine how international trade disputes are fought and potentially shake the very foundations of the US dollar's dominance. This isn't just about cars anymore. It's about economic leverage, geopolitical posturing, and the future rules of the global economic game. So what's your take? Will Japan's financial power play succeed in forcing the US to ease trade tensions and back down on those EV tariffs? Or will Washington dig in its heels, call Japan's bluff, and potentially escalate this standoff into something even more fraught? Perhaps even a full-blown economic Cold War over clean energy. Is this the beginning of a new era where financial clout becomes the weapon of choice in trade negotiations? Or is it a risky gamble that could backfire spectacularly on everyone involved, further destabilizing an already wobbly global economy? We genuinely want to know what you think is going to happen or what happened. Let us know in the comments below your theories, your predictions, your carefully considered outrage, or even just your favorite type of Japanese car. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe to Power and Policy for the latest insights on the shifting tides of global economics and the automotive world. Because believe me, this story is far from over. We'll be here trying to make sense of it, one bewildering spreadsheet at a time. Thanks for watching.